You're listening to Trek FM.
Hello and welcome to From There to Here, Trek FM's 50th Anniversary Rewatch of all 729 Star Trek adventures, all the way from Broken Bow, Oklahoma, all the way up to Yorktown Base and Star Trek Beyond. I'm one of your hosts for today, Lee Hutchison, and I'm joined once again by Caitlin Walsh.
Hello.
How are you, Caitlin?
I'm doing well, thanks for asking. How are you?
Yep, I'm ready to wrap up Season 6 of Voyager and go into the last full season that's going to be getting discussed here on From There to Here. It truly feels like we're getting closer to the end now.
I know, it's crazy how time flies.
So, this is the last season finale of any kind of show we're going to be discussing here on From There to Here. So, here we go. Unimatrix Zero, Part 1. Unimatrix Zero is a virtual world where drones can exist free of the Borg Collective and free of their biomechanical and corporeal implants. 7 of 9 visits there, and Janeway sees an opportunity to disrupt the Borg, even if it means the destruction of Unimatrix Zero. So, Caitlin, I'm really curious to hear, what do you think of Part 1 of Season 6's finale?
So, Part 1 is kind of a slow burn, but I like it. It's not annoyingly slow. It's, trying to discover how 7 of 9 is involved in this almost paradise for the Borg, and then realizing that Voyager can help out and trying to figure out what their role can be. I really like the fact that Janeway, B'Elanna, and Tuvok are willing to get themselves assimilated. And I like the way the writers wrote it so that you don't realize exactly what's going to happen until, when Janeway's leaving the bridge. It's almost like she's leaving it forever, the way they wrote the scene and the way they Kate Mulgrew and Robert Beltran played it. So I think the cliffhanger is a really effective cliffhanger. Almost, but not quite to the extent of Mr. Worf fire at the end of Best of Both Worlds. And that's kind of funny because this is another Borg two-parter, but it's so far down the timeline compared to Best of Both Worlds.
Yeah,
I can tell what you're gonna say based on that sigh.
I really find this episode, and we'll get to it in part 2, it makes me so angry.
Yes.
I feel this is the moment that Voyager's writers just chucked it. They did not care anymore. And I think the Borg have been on a shoddy stick probably since the end of Scorpion Part 2. I mean, this just kills them as any form of threat. I always remembered as a kid that, I got into Next Generation in like the early 90s, watching the reruns here, and when we got we watched the Best of Both Worlds, and it was terrifying, this omnipotent threat that couldn't be stopped, the fact that you saw it just wipe out hundreds of all these Federation ships, tens of thousands of lives. Then we go in and we see the beginning of Emissary, and we see how the Borg just cut through the Federation fleet like it was butter. Then we had First Contact, where as a 10-year-old I was so excited for. The Borg were my favourite creature, and the fact that it was going to be given the big screen treatment, it was going to be the Borg on a scale we'd never seen before, was incredible. And then when the idea I remembered seeing at the end of Blood Fever, the first time they teased the Borg, and then we got to see it in Unity, a bit more of the Borg. We see it on the small screen again. This big budget Borg on a small screen, brilliant. Scorpion, wow, that's amazing! Like a Borg cube just blown out of the stars like that. Holy hell! And then it diminished and diminished as Voyager just went back into that well, and they turned what was a threatening species into a joke. I mean, the scene, and there's a part come up in Imperfection in tomorrow's episode that just riles me totally up. And Voyager is going down to face a tactical Borg cube. like it's just a kind of Pakled ship or a Ferengi ship. It's, a bit of a skirmish. The Delta Flyer gets destroyed, but we'll be back by tomorrow's batch. And it turns the Borg in from a threatening species into a total joke. And it's just horrible to see that in the 4 years since First Contact, this is the state the Borg are in now. And I went from loving Borg episodes to Voyager's got a Borg episode this week, and it's what are they going to do to ruin them now? I get that they develop them as a species, they give them all these avenues, like Unimatrix Zero, but it took away from what the Borg were and that they were a threat. And seeing Voyager go toe to toe and beyond with them really disappoints me. And I just think Unimatrix Zero is part of the trend of kind of things in the early 2000s. Like, The Matrix was a great idea. How about this virtual world people go into? I couldn't care about Unimatrix Zero. I think it's interesting enough, sure, but its execution is boring. 7 of 9's love interest is bland. I think as a season finale, it's gone why don't we go to the well of having them assimilated? We've seen it before, and while it looks cool to see Janeway as a Borg drone, the fact that 2 minutes before the finale, it's nowhere even near the best of both worlds for me, because we watch best of both worlds and you truly believed at the time they're going to blow this ship up and Picard with it. With this, the bio readings, they're being assimilated. And Chakotay's something like, that's all part of the plan. Pats Tom Paris on the back, and then Voyager whops off, and it's like, so this is part of a plan. Thanks for making the summer wait not an issue. It just feels like the writers chucked it and they didn't care. And I'm sorry if I've ranted. I try to be positive, but Unimatrix Zero is just the death nail of one of the greatest races in Star Trek history. And I just think the writers didn't care. And breathe.
Yes. Take it, leave it all on the table. No, that's what this podcast is for. I can totally see your criticisms, but I'm not going to throw the episode under a bus and say, you're right. Your criticisms are valid, but they're your opinion. I think part of the Voyager's problem is they set up in season 3, season 4 of the Borg having a particular space that they needed to get through. And then after Kess left, she gave them a gift of getting them out of Borg space. But for some reason, aka the writers' laziness, they just kept running into the Borg. And that's probably the reason why the Borg were so quote-unquote degraded. I'm kind of an optimist when it comes to Star Trek viewing, so I tend to look for the good things in all episodes, which is why I thought Unimatrix Zero was interesting, because they were already trying to find the Borg's humanity, already trying to find the Borg's humanity through 7 of 9, and it was an interesting idea to try to give the drones a taste of their humanity. It's a shame that this quote-unquote Borg Civil War kind of went nowhere. And I remember now that line. You're right. That's the one thing I will agree with you, Lee. Chakotay's line before we see all of the assimilation happening for ourselves definitely does pull the rug out from this powerful cliffhanger and weaken it. So I actually do retract my statement saying it was almost as powerful as Best of Both Worlds. But that's just the problem with having an alien species that the writers knew could draw viewers, and they were almost addicted to just bringing out the Borg when they knew they needed a ratings push, instead of coming up with a new species.
Like the Vardwar that was never to be seen from again.
Oh, yeah. And then even the Herosian, who were seen again because of the holographic killing, the end of the Killing Game two-parter. So it's kind of a shame that this is how season 6 ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. But I feel like Part 2 suffers from Star Trek two-parter syndrome, in that all the ideas that were intriguing to me in Part 1 just kind of get shuffled and tossed under the carpet. So listeners, in case you were living under a rock during the end of Season 6 and beginning of Season 7 of Voyager, the plot for Part 2 is that Janeway, B'Elanna, and Tuvok have managed to get themselves assimilated, but their individuality remain intact. The Borg Queen is threatening to fully assimilate Tuvok as the three of them race against time to try to save the Borg drones who have been decided to rebel against the Queen.
Like, for me, Part 2 is worse than Part 1. Because I think Part 1, for all the flaws as I chucked under the buses, it feels like it is building up to something. In Part 2, apart from the Tuvok aspect where he's kind of trying to fight the Borg voices in his head, it just feels like they, as you say, they just fritter away any kind of interesting ideas they developed. And like, Part 1 would be redeemed if it truly went somewhere. And Part 2, you know, it's shocking, really, frankly. This is where I think, like, the writers just chucked it, because they have this interesting concept. They've got Janeway, Torres, and Tuvok are assimilated by Borg. Wow. I mean, they slightly underdid it with the finale itself, because we kind of got the wink and the nod. That, oh, this is going to plan. Wait, why is that going to plan? But then you could almost forgive it if they kind of draw that out a bit longer. Before the credits are even kicked in, it's like, oh, by the way, it's all part of a plan, we're still ourselves. Could you not just, like, pull this out, draw it out, make it a bit of a mystery and a bit of a tension? Don't just show your hand straight away. Things like that really disappoint me, because there's some interesting ideas here, and the writers chuck them. They chuck that under the bus straight away. The idea of a Borg Civil War could be an amazing thread through Season 7. Unimatrix Zero, as you say, it could be an interesting idea, this kind of home front that they could tap into throughout Season 7 to explore the Borg Civil War, this place the Borg go to. None of that's ever heard from again. They just have this self-contained episode where it implies that there's bigger things, big schemes, and it's just totally forgotten about. We get so many pointless episodes in Season 7, and this could have been an amazing thread to tie Unimatrix Zero to Endgame. By the time we get to Endgame, this is never even mentioned. It's just such a shame to see a final season begin in such a limp, disinterested manner, and that hurts me as a Star Trek fan. I dislike it because I see traits that I don't expect and demand from Star Trek writers and talent, and I feel by this point they didn't care, and that's really sad. I think Star Trek deserves better than that, and Voyager, with these things, sometimes you're so disappointed in them because they're so close to being great. They play with some big, bold ideas, and they just don't follow through, and that is such a shame for fans like myself, and I feel sometimes for Star Trek Voyager fans that while they love the show and that's great, they could have still delivered more to them. They could have given them a show that they would have even loved even more. And you know, that's me off my soapbox. I'm not, I hope people aren't thinking I'm being negative and being purposefully thing. It's just something I feel strongly about this episode, and I can't just say, well, I think it's fine or this and that. There's some good aspects in it, but it's really let down, and I think as fans we're let down too.
It sounds to me like you were, could I say, betrayed by how poor quality this Voyager season begins with, and you feel hurt that you had invested all this time in becoming a Star Trek fan, and then there's Voyager just kind of throwing in the towel and limping across the finish line.
Not really, I suppose, because I think with, like, you know, Star Trek, you're in it through the good times and the bad. It's like, if you're a Trekkie like me and you, Caitlin, we're here for the best of times. You know, some of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine, Star Trek, Voyager, TNG, I'll watch over and over. Heck, even bad episodes of this, I've watched Unimatrix Zero probably 4 or 5 times. I don't like the episode, but it's Star Trek. It's still better than most things, and even with an episode like Unimatrix Zero, I think the episode is a total failure. But it's like The Phantom Menace, for example. It's a terrible Star Wars movie, but I find it fascinating to watch and examine how it failed. That you have 729 episodes. You can't like them all. It's all part of the Star Trek commitment. And when it falls short, it's good to examine why I think it failed. I'm not just saying Unimatrix Zero is a terrible episode and not giving reasons why I think it is. I think with like a relationship like I have with Star Trek, and it'll be the same on Earl Grey, I love so much of it. Some aspects of it are really disappointing, but exploring why something's disappointing and talking about the process, whether it's in front of the camera or behind the scenes, about why it failed, is part of being a fan, is being constructive. I'm not just throwing things under the bus. I'm giving what I think is constructive criticism. And I think, like, as I say, just basic ideas. This could have been a great episode. It's just disappointing to see Star Trek in that way, when it feels like it's just a few revisions and drafts away from being something special.
Yeah, I can definitely see your point. I remember when I first discovered Voyager, I loved it. It could do no wrong. Like, even Threshold didn't bother me. But then I
must make one point. I love Threshold. Carry on.
Okay. And then I got more into fandom, and I started interacting with more Star Trek fans and not just exclusively Voyager fans who shipped a captain and the first commander. And I realized that, Voyager has its flaws, and like I said, Unimatrix Zero Part 2 definitely suffers from Part 2 of the Star Trek two-parter syndrome. But I think to start the last season on something that just kind of completely falls apart, like a house of cards, is really kind of disheartening. So you take the good with the bad. Everyone has everyone has the episodes, you're right, Lee, that they love or hate, and then the ones that are in the middle. But this is definitely more of a negative reaction than a positive reaction.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say about Unimatrix Zero before we continue on in our journey through season 7, Caitlin?
Just grateful that they were Kate Mulgrew was willing to put up with all the Borg makeup, because it's just another interesting facet to the captain.
Yeah, and she looks really cool. They look really cool as Borgs. No one can deny how awesome the makeup effects is in this.
Yeah,
work. It is really good.
They have the +1 of being main characters because all of their eyes are intact and they don't have any appendages, but they still manage to get their skin color and their hair taken care of. So that was interesting.
Yeah, I think this kind of wraps up our episode. We've probably gone on a few minutes too long about this, but yeah, let us know what you think of Unimatrix Zero Part 1 and 2. I'm sure there's people out there that feel the total opposite end to me, that think it's a brilliant development in the Borg story. Yeah, I'd love to hear what you think, and I'm sure you're the same, Caitlin. I think this, we've had a great debate and discussion about it. Let's throw it over to you guys. Tell us if maybe I'm right or wrong about the writers chucking it. Let us know. We'd love to hear it. So, Caitlin, if people wanted to get in touch with you about this episode, where can they find you?
They can find me in the Babel conference. I'm not posting much, but I'm definitely lurking. And I'm on Twitter at Walsh Caitlin. That's my last name, first name. If you want to hear more of my Star Trek opinions, I can be heard. You can hear me on Star Trek Romulans Bearing Gifts, and there's a link to that on my Twitter feed. What about you, Lee?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Lee_Nostromo. You can find me on my Star Trek artwork page, Star Trek VHS. You can find me on my own podcast, Filibuster, talking about geek and pop culture and sometimes Star Trek more broadly. And you can find me talking about the next generation that started the Borg story, and some argue that it ruined the Borg just as much as Voyager. So I'm sure we'll have an episode discussion about that at some point. So yeah, there's plenty of places you can find us both on the internet. So please get in touch with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So until next time, live long and prosper.